Have you ever stopped to think about how that one website looks amazing on your huge desktop monitor, but then also looks perfect on your laptop, your tablet, and even the phone in your pocket? It's something we totally take for granted now, but believe me, it was not always this smooth. So let's dive into the story of how the web learned to adapt. It's a revolution, really, called responsive web design.
I mean, it really wasn't that long ago that browsing the web on your phone was, well, a total gamble. Companies had to build two separate sites. You had the main one for desktops, and then this clunky, stripped-down version for mobile. It was a huge headache for developers, and honestly, for us too. But now, it's just one website that magically fits every single screen. The question is, how on earth did we get from that total chaos to this elegance?
All right, let's go back in time. Our story really kicks off in the early days of the mobile internet. I like to call it the age of pinch and zoom. The iPhone had just hit the scene, and boom, suddenly we had the entire web in the palm of our hands. Well, kind of.
Oh man, you've got to remember this, right? Squinting at that microscopic text, pinching to zoom in, and then that frantic sideways scroll back and forth just to read one sentence. It was like trying to read a giant newspaper through a tiny keyhole. This awful, clumsy experience was the problem everyone was facing, and it was screaming for a solution. Something had to give. This constant frustration just wasn't sustainable. The web desperately needed a single, unified solution. It needed a whole new way of thinking, a really big idea that was about to change absolutely everything.
And here it is, the spark. Back in 2010, a web developer named Ethan Marquette he nailed it. He saw that the world was changing. We weren't just designing for desktops anymore. We were designing for this explosion of new devices. And he didn't just see the problem, he gave the solution a name. He called it responsive web design. And here's the absolute key. Instead of building a bunch of different websites for different devices, you build one website, a single, flexible website that responds and adapts to whatever screen it finds itself on. This was the game changer. And wow, it couldn't have come at a better time. Why? Because look at where we are today. More than half of all internet traffic now comes from mobile devices. So responsive design went from being this clever little idea to an absolute non-negotiable necessity for pretty much anyone with a website.
Okay, so how does this magic actually work? Well, it's not really magic. It's actually a super clever combination of three core principles. Let's break down these three pillars of responsive web design.
All right, first up, fluid grids. Now, imagine old websites were built on like a rigid metal plate. If you tried to make it smaller, it would just break, right? A fluid grid, on the other hand, is way more like a sheet of stretchy fabric. It uses proportions, think percentages instead of fixed pixels, so the whole layout can stretch or shrink to fit any container perfectly. And yeah, this shows the difference perfectly. Look at the left, that rigid layout with fixed pixels. On a small screen, it just shatters. It's totally unusable. But on the right, the fluid grid just adjusts. It changes its proportions and everything stays intact, and most importantly, readable. Okay, pillar number 2 is all about flexible images. You know how a big, beautiful image looks great on a desktop? Well, on a phone, that same image is a total disaster. It spills right off the screen, and you're stuck with that horrible sideways scroll again. So this pillar is about taming those images, making sure they scale down proportionally so they always fit inside their container, no matter the size. And isn't this before and after just so satisfying? You've got that huge, out-of-control image on the left, and then on the right, it's just perfectly contained. It's visible. You're not chasing your content off the edge of the screen anymore. So much better. And finally, we get to the brains of the whole operation, CSS media queries. Think of this as the code that acts like a little traffic cop. It's constantly asking questions like, hey, how wide is this screen? Or, is this phone being held portrait or landscape? And based on the answers, it applies a specific set of style rules to make the layout look its absolute best.
At its core, it's just a simple set of if-then rules. If the screen is this wide, then the layout should look like this. So, if the screen is super wide, then maybe we show 3 columns. But if the screen is narrow, like on a phone, then we stack everything into one single, easy-to-scroll column. It's this simple logic that makes the whole thing work. Okay, so those 3 pillars, that's the foundation. But in the years since this all started, responsive design has grown up. It's evolved from just a set of cool techniques into a whole philosophy for how we build websites today.
So let's take a look at how that thinking has changed.
Probably the biggest shift in thinking is the mobile-first approach. It used to be that you'd design this giant, complex desktop site and then try to figure out how to cram it onto a tiny phone screen. It was a mess. Now, smart developers do the exact opposite. They start with the smallest screen. They build a fast, clean core experience for mobile, and then they progressively add more features and complexity as the screen gets bigger. And you know what? It just leads to better, faster websites for absolutely everyone.
And it's not just about the layout anymore. Modern responsive design really cares about things like readability. We're talking about responsive typography. These are techniques that make sure the text isn't just tiny or huge, but that it's perfectly scaled to be comfortable to read on any device, whether it's a tiny smartwatch or a massive TV screen.
And if you want to know what's on the real cutting edge, check this out. Container queries. For a second, just forget about the size of the whole screen. This new tech lets an individual component, like, say, a single product card on a shopping page, change its own layout based on how much space its container has. It's a massive leap forward for creating these really flexible, reusable design systems.
Okay, I get it. This is all super fascinating if you're a designer or a developer. But why should a business owner care? What's the actual bottom line here? Well, it turns out that good responsive design is really good for business.
I mean, we have to come back to this one undeniable fact. The majority of your customers, your users, your readers, they're on a mobile device, period. If your site is broken for them, you're basically shutting the door on most of your audience. It's really that simple. Plus, a responsive site is just smarter. It's a no-brainer, really. You have one code base, so maintenance is way simpler and cheaper. The experience for your users is consistent across all devices. And when you update something, it's live everywhere, instantly. Compare that to the old way of juggling two separate sites. That was just a costly, complicated nightmare.
And then, of course, there's the giant in the room. Google. Google's entire ranking system is now mobile first. What that means is it looks at the mobile version of your site first to decide how to rank you. So a good responsive site gets rewarded with better search rankings. Plain and simple. Why? Because it gives people a good experience, which means they stick around longer, and your performance scores go up.
So when you boil it all down, responsive design was never just about squishing a website onto a phone. It's a philosophy. It's about being flexible, about being accessible. It's about building one single solid digital experience that just works for everyone, everywhere, on whatever device they happen to be using.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. The web is never, ever going to stop changing. We already have foldable phones, smartwatches, screens in our cars, and who knows what devices are coming next that we haven't even dreamed of. So the real question is, your website fits every screen today, sure, but is it truly ready for the screens of tomorrow?